Sanhedrin Daf Yomi Sanhedrin, truth and harmony, kol habוצע הרי זה חוטא. Sometimes there are various values that we hold by, characteristics that are each one in their own are good and proper and right, but they can sometimes clash with one another. You can have a person who is kind and honest. Kindness is a good thing and honesty is a good thing. But what do you do when to be kind you can't be honest? And to be honest, you've got to be a little unkind. What do you do? And to understand that, one has to understand the way that Rabbi Lapin Bloch described his brother, Rabbi Yitzchak Bloch. Rabbi Yitzchak Bloch was the Telzerov, who took over in 1929 from Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch, his father, the Telzerov. And he became the Rosh Hashiva in Telz until he was murdered by the Nazis. When he was murdered by the Nazis, his brother, Rabbi Lapin, was in the United States with his brother-in-law, Reb Motel Katz, and they, as a result of that, were able to re-establish Telz in Cleveland, Ohio. But on the day that he heard about the death of his brother and the community of Telz, he said, "You need to understand my brother. And to understand my brother, you need to understand the difference between two ideas, the idea of shalem and the idea of tamim." A shalem, he said, is a person who has all the good midot, all the good characteristics. And that certainly was my brother. He had every positive characteristic, every midat tovah that there was, he excelled in. That's who he was. But you can still be a shalem and that you have moments of conflict, when your different midot are at odds with one another, where they're clashing with one another, and you've got to resolve them. And you can sense that there are times when this person who is a shalem, a whole human being, is nevertheless in personal conflict and inner turmoil. But then you have a tamim. He says a tamim is a person who has managed to harmonize all of his midot into a single integrated symphony of character traits, of midot tovot. It's one symphony. And that was my brother. That he was so at peace and so harmonious. And that fitted in with the way my father always described him. He was the Rosh Hashiva in Telz when my father was learning there. And he just talked about his princeliness, that you felt you were in the presence of a prince. There was such self-mastery and such stature that everybody felt it around him. And that's important to understand the piece that we're learning, because for the last few hours this morning, I've been learning Rabbi Yitzchak's hesped on his father. So the Telzerov's hesped in December 1929, that's exactly 95 years ago, Rabbi Yitzchak gave a hesped in the shloshim of his father. And it relates to our Gemara. It's based on three psukim that we need to look at. The one pasuk is in Devarim, where we have that you've got to be careful to be and show no favoritism. Lo taguru mipnei ish ki hamishpat le'elokimu. Don't fear anybody when you're a judge, you're a dayan. No fear. The judgment is for God. Justice is God's, and you're God's representative. You can't show any favoritism. And we have a pasuk in Tehillim, which our Gemara translates in a particular way, and that is Ki Hillel Rashad Ta'avat Nafsho Uvotzea Beirach. If one praises a compromiser, no eitz Hashem, you are rejecting Hashem. And then we have a pasuk in Malachi talking about Aaron HaKohen. Torat emet hayta befiyu, a Torah of truth was in his mouth. Va'avla lo nimtza bisfatav, and there was never anything deceitful or crooked in his lips. B'shalom uv'mishor halachiti, he walked with me in peace and straightness. V'rabim heshiv me'avon, and he brought a lot of people back to tshuva and helped them avoid chet. That was Aaron HaKohen. Says our Gemara, Rabbi Lezer b'noisha Rabbi Yossi Haglili omer, Asur liftzoah. You're not allowed to make a compromise. Says Rashi, Mishibau ladin asur l'dayanim liftzoah. You can make a compromise in your personal capacity, but if you're sitting as a dayan in a beis din, you can't make compromises. You've got to find out who's right. If one is claiming $1,000 from the other, you can't say, well, let's split the difference and we'll make it $500 and then everybody's happy. You've got to work out what the truth is. And if you praise somebody who compromises and you say, it's amazing, he was able to end this thing. These people have been arguing for so many years. They came to Beis Din and he was able to settle it with a compromise. He was able to mediate in a way that they were satisfied. Rejecting Hashem. Ela, Yikov hadin et ahar. You've got to allow the law to pierce through the mountain. No matter what the consequences are, you pierce through the mountain. Shneimar, ki hamishpat le'elokim hu, as we learned. V'chein Moshe haya omer, and that's what Moshe used to say. Yikov hadin et ahar. That you've got to come it straight. That's what the din is. You can't try and compromise. You've got to resolve the din la'amito according to its truth. Aval Aaron, that's what Moshe used to say. But Aaron, that was different. Aaron was Ohev Shalom, Veroidev Shalom. He loved peace. He pursued peace. Umesim Shalom be'enodem lechavero, and he set a peace between one person and another. Shneimar, Torah temet hayta befiyu v'avla lo nimtza b'sfatav b'shalom u'b'mishor halach iti. Berabim heshiv me'avon, the pasuk that we've just learned. That's the piece of Gemara. In Avot Rabbi Natan, Hillel Omer havi mitalmidav shel Aaron. In Ovos de Rabbi Natan, so we have two Pirkei Avot. We have the Pirkei Avot that we have in our Siddur, and we have the Ovos de Rabbi Nosson, which is an expanded form of Pirkei Avot. And there, Hillel says, you've got to be, and it's in Pirkei Avot as well, Hevei mitalmidav shel Aaron, we paskin like Aaron. You should be a Talmud of Aaron. Ask the Telzer Rov, if Hillel tells us we paskin like Aaron, firstly, why does Rabbi Loza ben Osher, Rabbi Yossi Aglili say, Asur livtzoa v'chol habotzea harei ze choteh? No compromises. It's the law as it is. We're showing that that's the difference between Moshe and Aaron. And that Aaron did used to compromise. And Hillel says, you've got to follow Aaron. So why is Rabbi Loza ben Osher, Rabbi Yossi Aglili saying, Chol habotzea harei ze choteh? And furthermore, what about Moshe himself? If the halacha is like Aaron, why was Moshe so harsh? Why was Moshe so undiplomatic and so direct? Because diplomacy and honesty have a difficult time living together. How are you diplomatic? Moshe used to say, honesty is what comes first. There's no diplomacy. Aaron used to say, diplomacy comes first. You got to create shalom. How could Moshe go against Aaron if the halacha is like Aaron? And furthermore, you see that Aaron himself used to act in a way that compromised the truth. If two people were arguing, he would go to the one, he would say, the other one wishes you would be his friend, and we go to that one, so that one wishes you would be your friend. They talk so highly of you, it wasn't true. And then they would bring people together, so he would compromise truth in order to get to peace, in order to get to shalom, in order to get to an outcome. And the Telzer Rov deals with this conflict. And he deals with it not only in the area of psak halacha, in the area of dayanut, which is what our Gemara is dealing with, but he deals with it in the area of education just as much. Because in education as well, he says there are times where you've got to teach the Torah as it is. But sometimes if you teach the Torah as it is, people don't like what they hear. It's controversial. People don't like it. It's politically incorrect. People criticize it. They're uncomfortable with it. And so sometimes you've got to present things in a way that people can accept it. You've got to present things in a way that people understand. These are two different ways of education. And which is the right way? And the Telzer Rov teaches that you've got to be able to work with both simultaneously. Because he says it's not as if Moshe went one way and Aaron went another way. And there was some kind of conflict between the approach of Moshe and the approach of Aaron. We receive Torah from the combined, from the synthesis of Moshe and Aaron. That's why I started with Rabbi Meir Bloch's description of Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Bloch. Because in seeing the description, you understand where he's coming from. That you've got to be able to take these opposites and create this integrated symphony where it's actually one. That's what a symphony does. You take different harmonies and you listen to the one and you listen to the other, and they're two completely different harmonies, and you're able to bring them together into one harmony. You're able to bring them together into something symphonic. That's the integration of opposites. And it links together, as you'll see with our last year on Daf Daled, where we talked about Eim L'Masoret, where sometimes you'll see a contradiction between the way the Torah is written and the way the Torah is pronounced. And how do you manage that contradiction? And from that we learnt about the management of paradox and contradiction generally. That at times you're looking at two things, each one makes a lot of sense in its own, but when you put them together, they're irreconcilable. And we talked about Eim L'Masoret. Sometimes you put them together and realize they're reconcilable if you see the one as the mother of the other, the one as the initiator of the other, as the generator of the other. And Rabbi Yitzchak says that's how you've got to look at these two approaches. It's not that it's either emet or it's shalom. It's either diplomatic or it's honest. You've got to be able to have honesty at the core and diplomacy as the way you present it. That's got to be something that's different. You can take a healthy ingredients and you can cook them and prepare them in a way that is absolutely delicious. Somebody eats, enjoys the eating, wants to eat, or you can just give them the ingredients, the right amount of protein and the right amount of the various different things that they need to have, and just lump it on the plate without proper preparation and say, this is what you've got to eat. There's a way to take what is true and good and wholesome and present it in a way that is palatable and delicious. The problem is when you compromise that which is true for that which is palatable. That's when we get into dangerous ground. When the child says, I don't want the food, it doesn't taste good. So you say, okay, so have candy. Yes, the candy tastes good. So is that, what have we done? So we've made it palatable, but the child gets ill. What's the alternative? You give the child the food and it tastes terrible. That's also not okay. The ability to take emes and to be able to present the emet in a way that doesn't compromise the emet, doesn't compromise the truth, but yet it's palatable. That's the art of teaching. That's the art of communication, is to be able to be meticulously honest and at the same time your communication is able to be accepted, it's able to be heard without people becoming defensive when they hear it. And he brings the medrash on Shir HaShirim, on the posuk of Chiko Mamtakim. Hashem's words are beautiful, they're sweet. Rabbi Zori v'Rabbi Acha b'Shem Rabbi Yochanan amru b'sha'a sheshamu Yisrael b'Sinai anochi. When Hashem said anochi, just the first word on Har Sinai, parcha nishmatan, they couldn't take it. They died. Klal Yisrael, everybody died. And they said, Im Yosifu anachnu nishma, hadau dichtiv nafshi yatsa bidvaro. They couldn't take it. Chazar hadibur lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The words went back to Hashem. It's interesting that words are a force of energy. Once you've uttered a word, it's real. It's like a force of angel. It's an energy in the world. This angel, the words go back to Hashem. You're living. You're the essence of life. Your Torah is the essence of life. And you've sent us to give your word to these dead people. We came to Bnei Yisrael, they just heard the first word and they all died. They can't listen to anything else. Hashem went back and he was mamtik, he added sugar, he added sweetness, and he repeated it. And that they could hear. And that's the Kol Hashem b'koach, Kol Hashem b'hadar. Hashem started off b'koach, and then b'hadar, then first in force, and then in glory. And Rabbi Yitzchak asks, the Rebbeinu Shem knows what people can tolerate and what they can't. If they were unable to tolerate Anochi, why did he do that first? And then he had to go back and do it differently. Why not do it right the first time? Why does he do that? Says the Rabbi Yitzchak, because you've got to give them the essence. You can't dilute the essence because they can't take it. You've got to find a way to give them the essence, and then maybe afterwards, sometimes it's simultaneously, and sometimes it's afterwards. You give them the truth, and then you make it palatable. Then you apply it. Then you show them how to use it. You show them how to apply it as chokhmat chayim, as a way to live by. Sometimes you're teaching the Torah, it's a theoretical principle. How do you apply it? What do you do with it? Then you teach how to apply it and what to do with it. You've got to come with both of them. It can't be one without the other. There was A beautiful story my father used to tell where Reb Meir Bar Ilan, he was Reb Meir Berlin, he was the son of the Netziv, later became Reb Meir Bar Ilan, after whom the university is named. Reb Meir Bar Ilan was one of the founders of the Mizrahi movement. At that time, the Gedolim of the yeshiva world were very opposed to Mizrahi. Not going into any judgment about yes or no, but what was the essence of their opposition? Was they were worried that they were diluting the essence to make it palatable. That it had to be palatable and Zionism. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, are you beginning to dilute the truth? And are you beginning to say things that you want people to hear so that it will be acceptable? You're becoming a political party now. Are you getting into politics and are you distorting Torah to make it politically palatable? That was their objection. And he went to the Brisker Rov to try and persuade him that what he was doing was good and right. He went to the Brisker Rov and he sat in front of the Brisker Rov. The Brisker Rov didn't pick his face up from the Gemara. And he coughed a few times. He said, "Excuse me, I've come to see you a few times." The Brisker Rov just carried on learning and wouldn't talk to him until he got up and he left. A few days later, he was in Vilna. He went to Reb Chaim Ozer Gruzhensky, and Reb Chaim Ozer Gruzhensky puts his arms around him and honors him and gives him a seat. "I'm so happy to see you, Reb Meir." And they get into conversation. At the end of this beautiful conversation, Reb Meir Bar Ilan, Reb Meir Berlin says to the Rav, he says, I don't understand it, Reb Chaim Ozer. I was at the Brisker Rov the other day and he wouldn't even talk to me. He wouldn't even greet me. I come to you and you hug me and you embrace me. And you guys are from the same school. What's going on? And Reb Chaim Ozer answered, the emes is with the Brisker Rov. The truth is with the Brisker Rov. You've got to understand there's a place for truth which is not diplomatic, and there's a place for diplomacy. And you've got to bring them together and understand that there's a truth and there's a diplomacy, and one has to be able to bring them together in order to understand. And so when the Rabbi Loza ben Osher, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, "Osur livtzoa v'chol habotzea harei ze chote," always know, you've got to know what the din is. You can't make a compromise because you don't want to go to the trouble or make yourself unpopular of declaring what the din really is. You've got to be willing to do that. It's got to be clear in your mind. Your inner place has to be absolute moral clarity. Once you've got that, then you can go with the derech of Aaron. You can take that which is true and you can present it through a lens that makes it easy for people to understand and to accept. Always checking that your having done so has in no ways diluted or compromised the essence of that which is true. So diplomacy doesn't have to come at the expense of truth. It rather is a coating to truth to help make it palatable, but never to dilute or to compromise or to in any way contradict that which is emes, that which is the truth itself.